Was there ever a game you played in arcades growing up and dearly loved it and wanted a version to be released on your home computer or console, only to find out it never happened or was supposed to happen but ended up being cancelled for whatever reason? Stuck in Arcades Part 2 will be a video full of nostalgia and most likely will be full of arcades games that you never knew existed. Some only releasing in certain parts of the world, and some were even overshadowed by the rise of 3D games in the mid-90s, giving arcade gamers new experiences. And of course, back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot less media bombarding you every minute of every day, and many of these games might have just passed you by without even realising they existed. From forgotten classics from the titans of the arcade industry such as Sega and Data East, Part 2 in this series will make you scratch your head as to why some of these highly polished and quality games have never been touched since their initial releases, but rather left to be just a distant memory of yesteryear. From trackball based games, running guns and beat 'em ups, this video covers a good scope of genres. And just remember, this is Part 2, and so if there isn't a particular game listed in this edition, then do check out Part 1 afterwards. So anyways, let's explore another 10 games that are stuck in the arcade.
Kill your enemy by any.
The Outfoxes is an absolute must for fans of Super Smash Bros. Although this was a Namco release which launched in arcades in the beginning of 1995, making this game the first of that style that coincidentally Nintendo ended up adopting with its initial release of Super Smash Bros. For the N64 back in 1999. Admittedly, the Outfoxes never received the publicity that it deserved at the time of release due to the influx of new technologies emerging, which allowed most developers to start releasing 3D fighting and 3D racing games. And of course then, by 1995, 2D platformer games like the Outfoxes looked fairly dated overnight because of this. At its core though, the Outfoxes is a seriously tight weapon-based fighting game that most definitely deserves more attention than what it gets, which is pretty much the next to nothing. The aim of the game is to kill your opponent by any means necessary. We play as an assassin in the game, in which we have the choice of playing as one of 7 characters, all of which pretty much play the same, although each has their own special action ability too. The game also allows a multiplayer mode, which makes it even more chaotic. The stages are fairly interesting too, some creative and fairly large gameplay areas in the Outfoxes, and what makes them even more interesting and dynamic is that as the timer counts down, parts of the level begins to change, which can often give us an advantage and make things easier or disadvantage us altogether. Controls within the game are fairly straightforward, and picking up weapons is just a case of pressing down on the joystick to collect them whilst pressing fire obviously shoots weapons and grenades or even rocket launchers. A PlayStation port was announced in 1995 but was never released, very likely because of the Outfoxes' poor arcade sales, but that's just a wild guess. Anyways, check out the Outfoxes, this is one awesome game.
Grenade gun. John, hit 1.
AB Cop is one of those mysteries as to why such a quality Sega game never got ported to anything. A little like Alien Free the Gun, which I covered in the first video of Stuck in the Arcade. Oddly enough, AB Cop was developed on the Sega X boards, which also gave us Afterburner, Thunderblade, Super Monaco GP, and GP Rider. Each one of these received various ports across many different platforms, yet AB Cop never did. If you have never seen this game before, well, think of it like a hyper-futuristic version of Taito's Chase HQ games, because at its core, this is what this 1991 Sega 3D racing game really is. We start the game off with a brief description of something bad happening, and it's up to you who plays the part of the airbike cop to catch up with the criminals and destroy them. Before we catch up with the main boss, which is at the end of each stage, aka end of level guardians, we must take down their accomplices, simply just by bashing into them, and if we don't achieve to take all of these down within a time limit, the game is over and we start the stage again. There's a total of 5 fairly lengthy stages in the game, each with a different look, which represents represents different parts of the world of AB Cop. Controlling the air bike can be a little strange at first, but after getting accustomed to it, AB Cop is a fun game and must play for fans of Chase HQ. We have an accelerator button as well as a jump button, which we have a limited supply in the game. As the game progresses, enemies are more difficult to crash into, as bends and objects dividing the roads can get in our way very frequently. Although today the visuals of the game can look a little messy, this was once a seriously groundbreaking game that was highly praised for its super scaling. For fans of the classic 1988 shooting gallery arcade game, which is of course Cabal, then this is Blood Bros, a much lesser known spiritual sequel that TAD Corporation also produced and released back in 1990. It is very unlikely that you are not aware what Cabal is or was, but we'll just say it's pretty much identical to the game you see here. Although the theme in Cabal is based around a more military war setting, much like Vietnam, but Blood Bros goes for the Wild West theme, and it surprisingly works really well too. It is more of the same in terms of gameplay, although originally this game wasn't actually controlled to a trackball like Cabal was. So what you see here is what you get. We have a few different levels per stage, each one containing lots of enemies to shoot down, which range from cowboys and Indians. We even get zeppelins and biplanes to shoot down too, as well as having cannons that once shot provide us with points. Controlling the game is fairly simple, especially for Cabal veterans. Holding down on fire button will hold our cowboy in one place whilst we use the crosshair to shoot anything we see on screen. We can also jump and roll to avoid enemy fire and bombs being thrown at us. We even get to destroy a train in this game too, as well as destroy buildings, which all looks pretty spectacular and obviously reminiscent of Cabal. So now we're in the coffin just a little further that this is a spiritual successor game. Once levels are finished, we get a little jingle sound as we jump off into the distance. We can also play Blood Bros as a co-op, meaning that one player can play as a cowboy, whilst player 2 can play as the other blood brother, the Indian. The ultimate goal of the game is to take down the most wanted outlaw in Dodge City. It's very strange how this game never got ported to anything and remains an arcade exclusive locked into the year of 1990. Cabal, in which I covered in my arcade port series just a little while back, was actually ported to 7 different systems, one of which actually had 2 different versions. Blood Bros could have easily went down as one of those highly regarded games too. When old schoolers think of the sequel of Sega's legendary fantasy hack and slash game, which is of course Golden Axe, they will likely and instantly think of Golden Axe 2 for the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis, which released in 1991. But there was actually an arcade sequel too, which released in 1992. And it is this sequel that could have seriously been ported across rather than the sequel that we ended up getting for the Mega Drive. Instead, Golden Axe the Revenge of Death Adder remains an arcade exclusive to this very date. Sega utilised its own System 32 board to develop this masterpiece, and the difference between the original arcade 1989 game and this sequel are impressive. Sprite detail, backdrops and everything else in between have all had major visual upgrades in intricate detail spreading throughout the entirety of its 5 fairly lengthy stages. We have a choice of playing the Revenge of Death Adder as a single player or as a multiplayer of up to 4 players simultaneously, with the amazing addition of a few new characters to play as, meaning that the original trio from the 1989 game are not playable in this game, although we do actually get a brief appearance from Gilius Thunderhead with this game. With fine adjustments made to the magic system and a much tighter feel to attacking enemies, another upgrade from the original game is that we can choose between paths that we choose throughout parts of the game, meaning this game is much less linear than its predecessor. The game is probably one of the best sequels ever made in this genre, and disappointingly, fans who played this version when it released in arcades a year after the Mega Drive sequel only wish they had this version instead. In this sequel, our main villain is of course Death Adder from the original game, but before we actually take him on at the end of the game, we get to fight our way through new enemies, new bosses, and everything just feels so fresh to fit with what was the modern style at the time of this game's release. A serious disappointment to many that this game never seen a home conversion back then. This was the very first fighting game that the famous development team known as Sega AM2 developed. Most of their games ended up getting a port, although this 1993 Japanese exclusive game never actually did. It largely got forgotten about. For fans of Shenmue, you might be interested to know that its producer Yu Suzuki also helped work with this game, although obviously much different. Burning Rival then is a one-on-one beat-em-up game, and I'll be the first to say that games like this one really were to a penny by the year of 1993. Of course, Capcom released Street Fighter 2 and Midway released Mortal Kombat. These two were obviously huge successes, which continue to be to this very day. And of course, Sega likely wanted a piece of the action too. Although this game didn't quite receive worldwide acclaim, Sega obviously went on to produce other better-known fighting games such as Virtua Fighter. As a game then, the setup is all familiar for fans of this genre, although something which does separate slightly is a particular style of visuals and animations used, which look very different from most games of this time. The game is based around the fictional Destiny City, and every so many years fighters from around the globe gather at this location in order to compete and be held as the champion. Like I said, pretty much generic stuff which sounds familiar to other games of this time and prior to this game's release. Burning Rival can also be played as a co-op game, or as I played it, as a single player, in which I take on the computer. We have 8 different characters to play as, and they're all fairly nicely designed. Of course, we do have a couple of look-alike characters here, such as the Ryu look-alike, which have all clearly taken some inspiration from other particular games. But the gameplay control mechanics do feel different to other games, and do take some getting used to, admittedly. If you have a spare few minutes, give this game a bash. It's always worth checking out other games similar to those that you love most. Although Burning Rival doesn't do much different than other obvious games like this one, it doesn't make this one any less of a decent game, and I highly recommend it. If you're enjoying the content today, please like and subscribe, and also remember to hit that notifications bell and select all so you don't miss upcoming content. This channel also has a wealth of emulation tutorials, including standalone and front-end guides. Just Jamie is your ultimate go-to channel for everything retro related. Anyways, for now, on with the video. What the heck? Any arcade gaming enthusiast will know how many scrolling shoot-em-ups were produced between the 80s and 90s, quite literally hundreds if not thousands. Most of the popular titles remain talked about today, R-Type, Gradia, Space Invaders just to name a few. But many, and far too many, were totally forgotten about, and by not having a home conversion, then Ergolet, released by band Presto in 1996, is definitely one of them. An absolute top quality game with some of the best and most intricate details with its visuals. Fans of Raiden will love this game as it plays and kinda looks very similar to it, and really, that's not a bad thing at all. Ergolet gives us 6 fairly large scrolling stages of carnage. The aim of the game is to take down a terrorist organisation as we shoot our way through many waves of fighter pilots heading our way, as well as take down massive bosses, which is at times where that element of the bullet hell subgenre comes into play. Of course, we can play this as a co-op game or enjoy it just as a single player game. We have some impressive firepower too, and this gets even more impressive and destructive as we power up our weapons by collecting items in the game. We of course have special weapons which are limited but can be useful to make everything on screen explode when the going gets tough. It is kind of understandable why games like this one was likely an afterthought. It's just another game that was released at a time when 3D games were dominating in the gaming world. That was a time when I personally wanted more games like this one releasing, but if you lived through the mid-90s, then you'll know exactly what I mean by the rise of 3D games. As great as this game is and how good it plays, it was originally intended to be even better. The development team behind Ergolet, known as Gazelle, was rushed to meet a release deadline. However, when playing it, you really wouldn't tell that any improvements was actually needed at all with this game. It's a flawless and fun scrolling shoot 'em up with amazing visuals. Data East once had a hell of a catalogue of producing some of the most remembered and well-loved arcade games: Robocop, Bad Dudes, Sly Spy and Carnob, to name just a few. Most of these ended up receiving many arcade ports for home computers as well as consoles. Any old school 8-bit or 16-bit computer user would undoubtedly agree that they owned at least one of these ports which Data East originally released. To say home conversions of this game wasn't lined up to happen, well, they actually were, they were just never materialised. Specifically, the Sega Saturn was supposed to get a release between 1997 and 1998. This game then is Cliffhanger Edward Randy, a game heavily inspired from Indiana Jones. The first stage out of its 7 in total can easily be seen to be very similar to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, in which Indy is chasing after Kazim in Venice. Our hero in this game even has a whip to attack enemies with. We can even jump onto coming vehicles and it all flows really nicely too. The aim of the Cliffhanger is to rescue a girl named Charlotte who has been kidnapped by a general, aka the Dark Ogre, and his army of Nazi looking soldiers. She is crucial to the baddies as she holds the key which is needed for the general to build a weapon of mass destruction. The game is set in the 1930s, again borrowing the whole Indiana Jones era, which works really nicely and it comes across really well too. The game was actually produced to give the player the sense of a cinematic experience, and the music really captures this in places. An absolute shame that the Cliffhanger Edward Randy remains as an arcade exclusive to date. Many people around the world likely never played this game before or was never even aware of its existence. It's truly a hidden gem that deserves better. With the height of Sonic the Hedgehog in full swing, Sega Sonic the Hedgehog was the first Sonic game to get the isometric treatment a few years prior to the Mega Drive game of Sonic 3D Flicker's Island. Originally, this game was played in the arcade by using a trackball which was mounted to the cabinet, which gave the player a real good control over one of the 3 characters we can play as with this game. It was originally supposed to be ported over to home consoles at the time. Presumably then the Sega Saturn would have likely have had a version, as well as the Mega Drive perhaps, although the main issue was that the original trackball control system was actually difficult to translate to a standard controller, and so it was scrapped and today remains another game lost in history to the arcade. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog was inspired from the classic Atari 1984 game Marble Madness and features 7 nicely implemented stages, all largely inspired or similar to the traditional 2D console games that came before it. Admittedly, the game is awkward to control with a standard controller, but it can be done to an extent. The game comes with some really nicely animated cutscenes reminiscent of the Sega Mega CD's game Sonic CD. It had mixed reactions and reviews over the years, and it really is a choice of preference if you like playing a Sonic game in that isometric perspective. It's a little like the whole debate of whether or not Sonic the Hedgehog games in 3D are good or not. The game's other playable characters are Mighty and Ray, who have since made appearances on and off over the years in different Sonic the Hedgehog games. The premise of the game is to escape an island which they were thrown onto by Dr. Eggman. I mean, personally for me, it's not the greatest Sonic game ever made, not even close to it in fact, but it remains an interesting part of Sonic history, and I find it difficult to believe that to date Sega could not reintroduce this game with a modern day control scheme for a new generation. Utterly baffling. And since Sega is attempting to revitalise its older game library from the 80s and 90s with the new releases of Shinobi, with others in the works, I really think somebody at Sega should at least attempt to do something problem with this isometric game and its problematic controls. I mean, seriously, technology has advanced a hell of a lot since 1993, and this could likely be done very easily at this day and age. If you were one of Pit Fighter's fans in the early 90s, and a couple of years later, Guardians of the Hood released in 1992, also by Atari. Now, of course, the whole criticism with games like this is that it uses digitized sprites and sprite scaling effects, and of course, they haven't aged too well. It was a groundbreaking new technology at the time that wowed people, but some experimental systems used back then just looks fairly terrible today. I wouldn't personally say that Guardians of the Hood is the worst of its kind, and I would even say it's kind of playable to an extent, but it remains as an important part of gaming history where developers want its games to look as realistic as possible. I actually covered Pit Fighter in my arcade port series, and there truly was some horrendous home computer and console ports of it. Most of them got slated for attempting digitized sprites and scaling to give depth to characters on very underpowered hardware, and most of them just came off seriously horrendous. It could have been quite possible then that Guardians of the Hood was seen to be a game not to attempt home conversions of, as Pit Fighter was never particularly known to have a good port. Of course, Guardians could be seen as a little more complex due to more happening on screen, more enemy sprites. Having said that, in between stages, we do have rounds where we are placed inside of a gym and face opponents. All of this really nails at home that this is very much like Pit Fighter. Guardians of the Hood is set in a fictional American town known as Center City. We have 3 gangs to fight: the Dreads, the Shavers, and the Dragons. The aim is to play as a gym goer who are known as the Guardians, and their aim is to reclaim peace to Center City. We fight these gangs through a total of 9 stages. We have a choice to play alone or up to 3 players simultaneously. I'll say that the game has 4 playable characters, but they are fairly bland to look at and nothing particularly makes them standout characters. There is even one character in this game known as Chief, although he kind of reminds me of a cross between Freddie Mercury and Hagar from Final Fight. It can be a tough game to play at times, and it often feels like enemies have the upper hand when fighting, as controls and collision detection with this game aren't really the greatest. I mean, like I said, it's an okay play, but most certainly not the best game ever in the digitized sprite genre of that era. We have another top quality and much lesser known game from Data East here with Desert Assault, or as it's known in Japan as Thunder Zone. This 1991 top-down scrolling shoot 'em up will remind many people of the awesome arcade game Mercs. It looks very similar and also plays similar too, although Mercs was actually a sequel to Commando and both were released by Capcom. It's the generic story of playing as one of a few different commandos, each armed with a different type of weapon. We can actually play this game too in co-op mode, where we shoot down hordes of terrorists within the Parisian Gulf. Each stage that we fight through has a brief introduction from a corporal who introduces that mission, who gives us some details of what we need to do in the mission and gives us an objective. It's generally just a case of shooting your way through all the hordes of enemies, using weapon upgrades such as flamethrowers and shotguns, and we even get to fly helicopters and many more awesome vehicles in this game. Desert Assault is an incredibly detailed game that certainly packs a punch in the run and gun genre, and is a must play for anybody who enjoyed the more known and common games in this style of the time. Explosions and special weapons are all nicely animated here. We have some very awesome effects being used throughout the game, such as smoke effects, which all add to the look of a war-torn setting. Boss fights, which you'll encounter at the end of most stages, can be fairly tough with this game too, so make sure you have enough nukes or or which other special weapon your chosen player has to take these down quickly and efficiently, as when bosses fire, they can get overwhelming very quickly. To my knowledge, there was never a planned port for this game, and it remains an arcade exclusive to date, which is very strange, considering the Mega Drive, for example, had a superb port of Mercs. You might have thought that this game could have been ported over too, a real shame. And that's it for another 10 very awesome arcade games which got no ports whatsoever. Did you actually play any of these games at the time? And let me just remind you, if you're new to my channel, do check out my previous videos. I've recently been reviewing the worst ever movie to game tie-ins, which are fairly interesting watches if you're into the history of gaming. Anyways, as always, drop a comment in the comment section and let us hear what you think of today's video. Until next time, stay retro.